All right, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, all depending on where you're listening from, whether that be in South Africa or abroad. Welcome back to another episode of Stream of Consciousness. I'm Adams van Sail, and here with me today is Penuel The Black Pen. You might recognize him from my appearances on his show, and I think once you've been on my show on a live interview as well. I think it was last year. And this time we're sitting here in the AfriForum TV atelier, or the studio, and for a conversation just about what's been going on in the past few years, what's really come to mind through some of your interesting conversations that you've had. And that's actually where I want to start. It's the fact that through the platform that you've created, there's something unique for me about it, and that's the fact that you are exploring ideas from all across the spectrum. You're like a South African Joe Rogan to a certain extent. You don't just talk to people that specialize in one thing or think a certain way or from a specific political persuasion. You talk to guests from all different angles, different perspectives, and I think that's what actually to a large part has built your audience, is that type of conversation. Do you think I've summed up your show well enough, or do you think it's a completely different angle that attracts your audience?
No, Ernst, bye-bye, donkey. I'm surprised that you introduce or you greet in English. I thought it was an Afrikaans program. At least now we have proof that I'm actually captured by AfriForum. I'm actually at the headquarters. I'm honored to be here, man. We have built a relationship over the past year or two, if I'm not mistaken. And the respect that you've constantly given me, the humility, the amazing information and education, and a lot of people may not know how intelligent you are, how well read you are, how much in-depth history you have. And I know you always downplay it, but I'm honored to be here. It means everything to me, and I hope the people that will be watching this will enjoy it. I started my podcast journey towards the end of 2021, but more especially 2022. And the whole idea was to have lacquer conversations with interesting people. I love the idea of challenging ideas and norms. Israel, Palestine, if you are Jewish, to maybe have a conversation with someone from Palestine that you'd never thought of. Maybe from someone from Palestine who's Jewish, as an example, like there are Jewish people in Palestine. And in the South African context, we've obviously got a history that is very racially divided. We have got a lot of tribalism. We have got a lot of xenophobia. We've got a lot of homophobia. We've got people from different political parties. People are constantly fighting, and you're almost always forced to pick a side. Blue Pillar, Western Province, Sundowns, Kaizer Chiefs, ANC, IFP. It's like, why can't I just be human and have human conversations? I can have my own opinions, perspectives, but I can still have a conversation with anyone and have it respectful. And that was the whole idea of the Penuel show. And now I've got another platform called Dope Conversations. And I've really enjoyed it. And I've gotten to revisit some of my upbringing, which is what people don't understand. I was a Zulu boy, grew up in KZN, but I went to Word School in Newcastle, played a lot of rugby, spent a lot of time with Indian kids as well, a lot of time with Taiwanese kids. So I've got like a very diverse upbringing, which makes or allows me to understand people. And when you speak with people like yourself, some black people, because they only grew up in a township, only with black people, only vote ANC, only watch soccer, they have this boxed thinking. And my hope was to say, if you're not going to do it, let me do it on your behalf. Let me sit with different people and let's have a lekker gesels about things you've never thought of and hear opinions you've never heard before. And I think it's been an amazing journey. Yeah.
But I think that approach that you're describing there, it has the effect also that, I don't want to say fight's too much of a strong word, but you tussle with your audience. You address them quite frequently and say, we have to understand why these conversations are important, or why I spoke to the specific guest. I mean, that it almost seems like it's part and parcel of that approach that you're taking.
There's a term called humanist. It was introduced to me by a good friend of mine called Andries Swart. He went to an amazing school in Boksburg called Dr. E.G. Jansen. Was an orphan, grew up in struggle, worked really, really hard. He works for one of the biggest banks in the country. No privilege, no rich family, no apartheid grants or tenders. And he got to build himself under an ANC black government, working very hard, very deep Christian. And when we became friends, which is probably over 10 years ago now, I used to argue with him a lot. You white people and your privilege, the reason you moved up the bank is because you're white and you don't see it. And throughout everything, he remained neutral. He constantly told me, look, you and I are friends. Anything you need. Whenever I did charity work, he would support, he would be there. He would confide in me about some of his own personal struggles, about his family, issues about his parents, etc. And over time, he won me over in this idea of what is a humanist. And a humanist is someone who respects and appreciates good human beings. Now, when you get to that point of being a humanist, it's like being non-racialist. You pick up enemies from both sides. Because anytime you are seen, I'll speak as a black person, anytime you are seen having a good time and having a friendly relationship with white people, you're a sellout. Anytime you are seen supporting a black initiative that certain white people don't like, it's like, but Penuel, you're better than this. And you're like, these are good people trying to do something. These are good people trying to do something, and you get caught in the crossfire between the two sides. So when you sit with guests from either side of whatever spectrum, you try to speak on behalf of another side to challenge their notions, which then creates that clash or tension, as it were. And it's like, it's not my opinion, but I need you to understand there are people that see you, could be Andries, as a beneficiary of white privilege. Everywhere you go in corporate, there are white people, they're like, oh, yeah, he's Afrikaans, you know, so it becomes easier. And he'll be like, but that's not the case, because I can count 50 other white Afrikaans people who haven't made it. So that becomes a story that a black person's never heard before. Really? It's like, really? And then you start having this really, really engaging, open-minded conversation, hopefully. Yeah.
And it might sound strange that the topic of our conversation just starts about speaking about the format of your show. But I mean, I think personally there are insights about the South African zeitgeist or the South African political environment or social environment to be found in things like, for example, how popular podcasts are being conducted, which podcasts are rising to the top and which are not making it. And I think one of the other things as well is, and I've picked it up because I've been a host, not a host, I've been a guest 2 or 3 times now on your show. And it's, you let your guests talk. You don't interrupt them. I see it so many times in the more mainstream media where when a journalist thinks I can now make a nice cut or a little bit of a stab, they stop their guest, interrupt them and say, but what about this and this and this, or let me stop you. And like, that's not your place as an interviewer, is to expose your audience, I think, to as many ideas as possible, not to grandstand theirs, but this is what I think. You can, there's a balance. I mean, someone like Joe Rogan does a lot of talking on his own interview show. Can be well done. But what you do on your podcast specifically is you let your guests speak. You say, well, what do you think about this? Or why do you believe this? And then you let them finish. Then you actually get very detailed and rich answers rather than just chasing sound bites and like, are you pro this or against this? Don't explain. Just, I want to get through as many questions as possible. But that's not the approach you take. And I think that's also, it also creates a little bit of friction within your audience, because your audience sometimes wants you to push back very hard and say, stop the conversation there, zero in on this one point and let's sort this out. But then you only get this amount of content and you just talk about one topic. Do you think your approach actually provides your audience with more content, even though it sacrifices that they don't get to clap and say, well, Penuel really put his guest in their place on this episode?
It's funny that you say that. I actually wanted to interrupt you as soon as you started. I get accused a lot of interrupting guests in my comments, funny enough. And I constantly have to try and explain to people, because you realize we've been conditioned, specifically by mainstream media, on what a conversation is. They are so used to interviews. So when you have say, oh, this, and then the person answers. That's the first part. I do conversation. So sometimes when I interrupt, it's not because I'm disrupting your thought. It's because I maybe want to add something, or I'd like you to maybe go deeper on something. The second thing is podcasts do give you the advantage of long format, which mainstream media sometimes struggles with. So certain journalists has only got 15 minutes with someone. And sadly, that mainstream media platform normally has an agenda. So as soon as you give a trigger word, they're like, yeah, but you guys said. And you're like, okay, that's the interruption. And that's where the guest now feels attacked. Sometimes they don't
And
get
then
to
the
finish their
conversation gets stuck there.
get stuck there. In long format, we have the privilege to go on, hopefully for as long as we'd like. And even if I do interrupt you, that shouldn't stop you from still finishing your thought and not like, look, we have to round up, we're going to adverts. It's like, I'd still like to finish my point. And if it so happens that the person does not allow you to finish, there are so many other platforms you can go to. Like, I went to visit this guy, Pen. He asked me a question. As soon as I answered him, he started attacking me. And I wanted to come to your platform so that I could actually finish my point and say what I wanted to say, so that other people that were frustrated as I was on that platform can now come watch me here. Which is also why it's important to have a wider array of platforms, so that if SAPC won't host you because they don't like what you stand for, if ENCA doesn't like you, if some other platform, you're like, I can go to 10 others, and if you do the cumulative number, I can do probably more numbers than I would have done on just one news channel. And I think that's really something important. Yeah.
And I think something else that I've noticed as well is you often, I often read the comment section. I mentioned in our chat that sometimes some people avoid reading the comment section because there will be people of the worst type of people
Fighting,
there.
horrible.
Horrible fighting. You see
Yeah.
a comment and then there's 500 replies under it, and you know there's just a massive debate. You're not even going to click expand and see
Yeah.
what's going on there. But I've watched many interviews in South Africa on your channel. I'm talking more about alternative media type of interviews, long format interviews. And something that I've seen particularly from your audience is the comment or the sentiment in some form of, this conversation taught me so much about this, or I learned so much about this in this conversation, or this conversation exposed me to this lesson that I've never thought about. But to turn that on its head and ask you, what have you learned from, how many interviews have you done now?
Geez, I should actually start counting. But it's probably well over maybe 200.
Yeah, so that then you
Not
can,
just on the Penuel show, but this is cumulative, probably well over 200.
and when it's over 200, you can say I've done hundreds of interviews. Maybe that's technically
That
right.
is true. I'm a multi-millionaire because I've got 2 million rand.
But through those hundreds of interviews,
Yeah.
what are some of the lessons that you've broadly learned, not from a specific person, but just from speaking to, as you said, people from so many different angles? I think a lot of them might even strongly disagreeing with you on many of your core ideas. But what are some of the in general lessons you've learned?
Just as a mini podcast 101, because you're speaking about podcasts and formulas and models, people need to always have a why. Why did you start? Are you trying to get all the girls at Tux? Are you doing it because the rugby guys are going to give you free tickets? So if you do like a rugby podcast, they'll blow Billa, give you free tickets to Loftus. But what is your why? And one of my whys comes from my parents, my mom, my dad. My mom was a school teacher my whole life. She's still a school teacher today. My father, who passed on in 2020, was a soccer coach his whole life. So myself, my brother, and probably my sister, we're very big on education. So whenever we sit, we love the idea of walking away from a debate, a conversation, an interview with some type of educational content. Oh, I once watched this guy from AfriForum and he said that's not true. And you're like, oh, okay. So I learned something. So I try, when I sit with people, to ensure that there's some educational aspect to it. I'd like to learn something from you that I may not know. I'd like to teach something that you may not know as well. And then the audience hopefully will pick up certain things. In the conversation as well, you try to curate the way it moves. Because of how we've been conditioned on mainstream media, even guests, when they come through, they're used to a certain style. They sit there, okay, pen question. So you almost want to break the ice in real time. So you've got kids, like, do you ever stress with school fees? You didn't prepare for that. So now you're like, yo, I literally got a letter last week. Now you're getting a bit more comfortable. By the time we get to, let's say, heavier issues, we've almost built a personal bond in a very short space of time. That stuff translates on camera. And even people that are watching, they may not like you, but they will be like, look, I don't like him. I don't like what he stands for, but I heard a human being. I saw him happy. I saw him a bit sad, a bit frustrated. In that 1.5 hours, 2 hours, he sat down. And if I sat through the whole thing, I can't just be like, oh, this guy is black, white. there's some great parts where I don't like these guys, but I like what he said. He's right. We must take accountability. He's right. Clean your home. He's right. At the end of the day, some of these guys are not going to help us. And you're like, I can't say no to that. So now I'm already being won over by the human aspect. Some of the things that I've learned from sitting with people have been very, very sad for me. Number one is most South Africans are still highly polarized. They still want a black box, a white box. You can't, nothing can be gray. It's either you're pro-women or you're pro-men. You cannot be understanding of both sides. And that comes across in the people you meet. I've been very saddened by a lot of the celebrities, political leaders, business leaders who, especially off camera, you realize they're not as great as you thought. So it's nice to know they're human. Because then you're like, oh, anyone can become as great as this person. Just choose to do the right thing or just do something extraordinary. But the off-camera chats, you realize there's a lot of fakeness. There's a lot of performance. There's a lot of trying to win, especially people with money. And there's a deep lack of self-reflection. There's a deep lack of self-accountability. There's a lot of blaming other people. I mean, I get attacked a lot now for, you love Afrikaans people, you always speak about Orania. And it's this thing that I wish could get through to people's heads, that at some point you have to take accountability for your life. That thing is hard for people. And I know Joe Rogan believes in it. I know I've seen some philosophers, I think back in the day, would be, everything is my fault. Everything. It's like, no, not everything. I mean, load shedding is not your fault. You're like, to be honest, it might be, because maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I haven't bought solar panels. Maybe I'm not championing the right political party. Maybe I'm not voting. Maybe I'm not helping to lobby. There's something that I'm doing that's allowing people like this to carry on. And maybe I must become the next presidential candidate, and that's how I can solve it. Most human beings don't have that. With that being said, there've been a lot of positives. I've learned a lot. I've had my own biases challenged. I've had to reflect on myself. A lot of the comments, some are very hard to swallow, but they help you to actually think about, are you aware of what you're doing? Are you aware of what you're saying? Have you considered the site? It's one of the reasons that even today, when people speak about the ANC, I get very angry, as I used to. But when you travel enough and you meet people that support the ANC and they explain in very simple terms.
Normal people, not politicians.
Normal people, not media people, why they support the ANC. You're like, I hate what you're saying, but I understand it. So I've been challenged a lot. I'll say this, Mark Cuban said this, he sat with Lex Friedman. Jack Dorsey said this, he was one of the founders of Twitter. They were saying this line of, it's two things. One, the person who controls the algorithms controls the minds. Jack Dorsey said the person who controls the biggest media platforms controls the minds. Media platforms are incredibly influential. It could be the Penuel Show, it could be TikTok, it could be Instagram. And where we've sat, we have changed people's perceptions. That is not a small thing. If you're sitting with a 55-year-old Bali from somewhere, and he tells you, I cried because I was so convinced. I was so sure that this thing is evil and bad. This person is wrong. And I cried because I realized I was wrong and everyone had been lying to me. And you're telling me that happened in 2 hours of a conversation, 2 hours of a conversation. And what that does is it reminds me to be responsible with the platforms. Have fun, be yourself. Let people be free. If you want to say something, no matter how inappropriate it is, please say it. Be free. Free conversation is very important. But understand that there are people out there who are being shaped by some of the things that we say. And because of that, I try to make sure that even in 2 hours of rubbish that we speak about, you can still at the end be like, guys, clean your house, go hug your mom and your dad, tell your children you love them. And you're like, these guys are talking a whole lot of rubbish. But I took that away, and that's really cool. So I think those have been my biggest learnings off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a amazing experience, but for bad and good and bad emotions attached to that when illusion is dispelled, when you believe one thing and then suddenly you realize, but that's not what the reality on the ground looks like. I've had that experience multiple times. You've just said you've had that multiple times. And we mentioned this in our previous chats as well. The immediate implication then that comes to mind is, and this is a very disturbing question, is what else am I being lied about?
Correct.
What else am I being lied to about? And then you start wondering and you start questioning everything, which is good, but you shouldn't just question. You actually have to go look for the truth.
Correct.
You actually have to go find it. You did that when you went to Orania. We wanted to chat about it in our episode, but we didn't get time. Would you like to chat a little bit about your visit to Orania? You think it fits in? Yeah, so it was, I think most of my audience will have seen your videos and content that you've created from Orania.
Yes. Thank you for sharing. Every time you share our sit-downs and any content you resonate with, I appreciate it very much.
Well, I share everything that I enjoy. I don't have time to watch everything. There's
don't
just
watch
so
everything.
Much content
just
out
the
there.
Stuff you enjoy is enough.
But I enjoyed that interview with Joost and with Karel Boshoff, and just the less polished, where you just sit down and chat about your experience. That's also very insightful. But I could see that experience for you was, again, expectations didn't match reality. You expected something completely different, and then the reality kind of shattered those expectations.
Correct.
But let's get into that without a specific interview question, but just tell me a bit about that experience.
Sure.
What was it like?
I'm one of the few black people, actually maybe one of the few white people as well, who actually admires Orania. Orania is a polarizing town and concept for a big chunk of South Africans, black, white, Indian, etc. Because it has been sold for a very long time. Maybe they're also a bit guilty of it themselves, because I think they've changed over time. Selling it as this place where white Afrikaners escaped to after a black government in 1994 came in. We don't believe in black people. We don't believe black people govern. The country's going to go to the dogs. So let's go and create our own little space where Afrikaners can run to and not have to deal with black people being in power. That has been the propaganda that was sold. I did research on Orania because I'm normally fascinated by polarizing spaces and people. Because I've learned over time that no one is a certain way. We're not binary. There's always a nuance. Could be the worst dictator you can think of. Could be Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. There's something you can learn. Just it's that fascination that there's something to learn. The other fascination is my brain, the way it works, cannot fathom that 1 million people, 5 million people are all so stupid that they would follow an idiot. So there must be something that person's doing or saying that managed to win these people over. And I'd like to know what that thing is. So you research the town of Orania and you learn all these things, which I came to really, really appreciate way before I went there. I had an idea of what it was. I remember a BBC journalist called Louis Theroux did a mini documentary. Orania, he visited the ex-leader of the AfriForum, Meneer Eugene Terblanche, who was passed on, and many other people, some who hated black people, some who were just like, they must leave us alone. Then he did another one on black Americans that hate white people. They believe white people are the devil, just to have that contrast. He visited Orania and there were some interviews he did, and classic BBC, he had his own stint and view on what it is. There are people that fear the town. They probably feel like if you go there, you'll get shot if you're a black person. And I've been wanting to visit the town for many years. I was aware that some of our ex-presidents had visited there.
Everyone except Ramaphosa, every single one.
Are you serious? Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki.
I think I'm 50% sure on Thabo Mbeki. I know Nelson Mandela was there. I know Jacob Zuma.
I'm also trying to remember if he's been there. He might have been there. I'm also 50%.
Yeah. So let me say that under correction.
Sure.
Definitely most of them. Definitely Jacob Zuma and
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela. And I'm pretty sure Mbeki, but I have to go check.
Yours Stradom, I think, even told me that Julius Malema of the EFF has been there as well. He's never spoken about it. I know Gates and McKenzie of the PA has spoken about it. I've been wanting to visit. So my perceptions were definitely shattered, but my perceptions weren't racist, white town, no. So I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting an estate, you know,
A
stay in
gate,
city.
gated
Yeah,
community.
gated community. You get there. Wie soek jy? Ek's hier vir meneer Joost Strydom. Joost, wie is hierdie man? No, this is whoever. That's what I was expecting. I thought it was enclosed. So my first shock is there is no fence around Orania. Black people in particular will speak about how did you get in, and you're like, there is no getting in. It's like getting into Soweto. Orania is like Soweto. You don't get into Soweto because there's this gate. It's a klein dorpie. You can drive in, drive out. You can drive past it.
Yeah.
There's signs, you drive through it like any other normal
I think
town.
many people have driven through and not even know.
Maybe even noticed, you know, that you realize you're in Orania. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you just drove through it.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that broke me, that there actually is no fence here. And it's one of the questions I asked Joost when I sat with him.
Yeah, it's such a great answer.
He made an amazing answer. He spoke about the Spartan king when they were asked, why are there no walls around Sparta? And he was like, if you see those men over there, those are walls. And as far as their spears go, you're like, okay. And he was saying that their spears is their own labor, which is their superpower. Something I'm still struggling with, and that I'll touch on now. That was the first thing, that there's no fence. The second thing is I'd heard about own labor. Hear about it. It's like, you know, we do our own work. You're like, okay, cool. You'll find some Afrikaans guy doing some work, maybe sweeping. When you see it, it's a different experience. When you travel around the world and you see certain monuments, I'm sure when you see the pyramids, the Victoria Falls, you've seen it in pictures until you see this thing in real life. You're like, you're telling me this was built back then, and you're like, it doesn't make sense. So you see the white Afrikaans guys building in construction, which is a new experience. Like, okay, this is, I normally see a white guy in a reflected jacket sitting in a bakkie with the black guys, they're working. The guys are working. Number one. Number two, you see the guys sweeping. Number three, you see almost everyone is working. Almost everyone is working. That doesn't even happen in like developed cities like Johannesburg, Pretoria. Everyone is doing something. Everyone is going somewhere. That was the second one, the own labor, which I struggle with. The third one was the innovations. Because I come from a town called Newcastle in KZN. When you're driving from Newcastle to Joburg, you pass a very klein farming dorpie called Meemel. I was expecting Meemel in Orania. I wasn't expecting innovations in building, the type of materials they use. I wasn't expecting to hear stories of a very old couple, I think in their 80s, that built their own house with their own hands. I wasn't expecting to see art. You know, there's a lot of artistic endeavors there. I didn't know that they had a tertiary institution. Very alive. They've got a beautiful school there, which also touches on mixed teaching methods online, and they're building an amazing rugby field there. I think their rugby team has started to play some games.
Innovations in alternative energy.
Innovations in alternative energy. So I'd heard about it before I went, but when you go and see it and you listen to, not only are they building a solar farm, or have they built a solar farm to go completely off grid, they are looking to obviously pump back into Eskom, number one, and also to innovate in terms of pricing, something we'd never thought of.
Yeah.
High demand electricity, if you can sell it, you make more money. So you could have your own solar and then make profits selling electricity. You know, you don't think about these things. They've got, so we have tuk-tuks that have come through now, but they've got electrical. You see this in Asia, in China, because I was in China last year. They've got electrical, these mini truck things that people use. There was a group of schoolgirls that was traveling, and apparently they have their own cleaning business. So they run a cleaning business there. Some of the things I'm learning of. Met an amazing lady who started Orania, which is going to be their official newspaper. The story of, I guess, what was False Gas, which became ABSA, but they've got their own mutual bank. The Orania, where Escar. Their savings, which is like a mini bank. The conversation I had with Meneer Karel Boshoff, whose father was one of the co-founders, what was key for me was finding some of the cheats, because I told him, it's half a confession, that as much as I wanted to come and see this place, document, have the sit-downs, I'm also coming here to steal with my eyes and my ears and to see any cool ideas we could send back to the rest of South Africa.
Right.
Not just townships, but any community. I mean, I live in a mixed community, white, Indian, colored in Johannesburg, northern suburbs. The idea of local business and the power of local business, which we don't emphasize enough on. The idea of own work and that, look, government hasn't cleaned up. You're like, we understand. They're useless. We're paying tax. Because it's our home, let's clean up. We can still blast them, but let's do the work so that we live in a clean space. Our own security, which AfriForum does exceptionally well.
Keeping money within the community.
Keeping money within the community, patriotism, having your own bank. And then the cheats of things like how to sidestep tax. David Ansara of the Free Market Foundation speaks about state proofing. If you and I are not transacting in terms of money, look, these are cheats. They're legal cheats is the nice thing. If you and I are not transacting in money, but we're transacting in terms of bartering, there is no financial transaction, therefore no one is liable for tax.
Yeah, you produce eggs, I produce apples, and
we exchange. There was no money, so I don't have to pay tax on money I made from you. You don't have to pay tax because we exchanged. Number two is the ora, which is known as the currency, which is more of a voucher system. But it's, let's take our currency, could be dollars, could be pounds, could be euros. Let's save it, let's invest it. But what are we need money to trade. Let's create our own money. Zimbabwe now has got the ZiG, I think it's called, a gold-backed currency, which I still have to go and do research on because the Zim dollar hyperinflation got devalued. They've got the ZiG now, which is new, gold-backed. We used to have gold-backed money, then it became fiat, which is backed by the Reserve Bank. If Dr. Lesika Khanyago at the Reserve Bank says, we're inflation targeting, that determines the value. Here we're saying we're investing our money. We're going to create our own monopoly money based on the money we have invested, and we're going to trade amongst ourselves. Number one, it forces us to trade amongst ourselves. Number two, our money can actually go and generate value and not be losing value here in the streets. I thought that was really, really cool. And then visiting their municipality, of which when I spoke to your Strado, I referenced the story by Yanni Moton, who founded PSG. They've invested in Curo, Stadio now, Capitec, Pioneer Foods, so many amazing businesses. They call him the Pura Buffett. He speaks about back in the day how their school had like an uneven rugby field. And it took parents working that. It took parents with their bakkies taking them to games. Today when I visit, over the weekend, I was at Afrikaner Science World School, AFIS. I was reading up on the history. I think it's from 1902, if I'm not mistaken. Starting off with grade 9 and grade 10 with 45 students. They grew very quickly. Eventually they split into Afrikaner Science, Afrikaner Macy's. And you think of the journey it took from a little campus. You think of Dr. I think it's Chris van der Merwe, if I'm not mistaken, of Curo. And he started, I think, in his garage or in his house. Then they moved to a church. Help Mekaar College, opposite Parktown Boys in Parktown. There was a bus I saw, I don't know if it was Help Mekaar, where it's written, Geborg deur die ouers. The idea of small intentional efforts over time. Them starting with one, old bakkie as a municipality. We'll pick up the litter, we'll come with spades and forks to a municipal building now. The story of Academie, if I'm not mistaken. Academia. Many of us, this is not just black, because black people have got a lot of beautiful stories. Stokvels, the taxi industry, I know our funeral parlors, spaza shops before they were taken over by foreign. We've got a lot of beautiful stories. Our churches, political parties, starting off with something small, people contributing a little bit of money, getting community involvement, and the beautiful stories you tell thereafter. Do you know this amazing musician who's a superstar now started in the church? Do you know this Springbok rugby player used to play on the same field that was uneven and the ball would bounce funny? We've lost that. And Orania reminded me of that, seeing them build a rugby field, seeing their tertiary institution and how it focuses on skills. They've got really beautiful workshops there where you can learn everything, electrical, plumbing. They've got, what's it called? Taking care of people.
Old folks homes. Or
something like that. But they've got this verzorg, or something like that they teach there as well. It's like you can see the progress and I can already see the future. And at the same time, sadly, I can already see the people that are going to be complaining. And it's going to be like, but guys, we watched this happen in front of our eyes and you weren't doing anything. Never mind building from scratch like them in the middle of a desert. You weren't even contributing to your church so that it builds a Saint Van Sale College. You weren't contributing to local businesses. So you see ShopRite, you see Pep. That was us. That was my father who started a little Winkelkie. And then we've lost all of that. So those were my big things. And it felt like a small pilgrimage for me. Even
Into
though
the
a pilgrimage,
desert.
sorry?
Into the desert.
Into the desert. A pilgrimage is to Mecca for the Muslims. The ZCC church, they go to Moria in Limpopo. It felt like I was going back to an ideology of something that I already knew and that I needed to visit again so that I could go back as this disciple and preach to people, guys, we have to work.
A thought pilgrimage.
Yeah, a thought pilgrimage, an ideology pilgrimage where you come back, you're like, guys, we have to work. Really, 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 we have to work. It's not up to government, it's up to us. Everything that you see today that's beautiful, that's great, was built by a few people that had a vision and put in work, and we can do it. We can do it. It's not just about voting. It's about actually putting in work. So that was really beautiful for me. The hospitality was great. People would be surprised by some of the developments there if ever they go visit. But the people are still very humble. Everyone greets, which I appreciate very much. It's something that a lot of the boys' schools in South Africa are very big on. Sir, ma'am, take off their hats.
The arm gets tired of waving.
The arm gets tired of waving, boy. I love that. One of the cool things Joost reminded me of, because you forget. You're like, all of these Afrikaans people sing Kumbaya. And they're always like, Afrikaans people are tough, boy. The amount of fighting we get here, because these people are like, what happened to that money? Wat gaat aan daarso? What's going on there? They hold you to account because they've got that mentality of accountability. It's not a place where you can just sing a nice song and everyone's like, well, I'm Afrikaans, therefore. I really appreciated the number of English white people that watched those sit downs and they're like, geez, okay, I also didn't know. I also had my own ideology. I wasn't aware. And how small it is as well. You also spoke about how many Afrikaners to this day still don't support them. Still think that their thing is not going to work out. You're like, guys, it's not this unity that you guys think of. Black unity and we're all white unity, and it's not like that. People are different. There are some that support us, some that don't. But we have a vision, we have an ideology, and we're trying to build something for our people that share our ideology. And we hope that other people will understand that this wasn't built from hate and anger. It's just a love for our people, and we're willing to work with anyone. As long as they understand that this is me and my family. You have you and your family. We can always exchange ideas, etc. But this is what we're about, and we hope you can learn from us and also do something special for yourself, because they help a lot of different communities, especially with the knowledge they have. I think in summary, it's that.
Yeah, and there's I don't know if you saw it, there's a very telling sign somewhere in that town that I think encapsulates their attitude perfectly. I have to remember specifically what it says, but it says something along the lines of, Western journalists, leave your prejudices at the door. But that's a sign that they put up based on their experiences, where many journalists and commentators and people from South Africa or Africa will come to Orania and understand what they're doing and say, no, we might not agree with everything here, but we can understand why you're doing this.
Sure.
But Western journalists will come there and will antagonize them, will attack them and say, well, this interview is about how hateful and terrible of a person or of a community this is. And nowhere was that better contrasted or shown than in 2024, where the BBC sent a journalist to, now recently, I think 2 or 3 weeks
Black
ago,
gentleman.
to Orania, and then they created this hit piece on them and about how terrible they are, lied about and said he's the first black person who's ever slept in Orania. Like that's definitely not true. But then I could respond to that story and say, you're painting this one picture, but here's a black South African film crew that visited Orania within the same time frame or the same time and had a completely different experience. Now you can go watch that BBC documentary or show, I don't know what format it was, and you can go watch Penuel's interviews and you can make up your own mind where the truth is. But you have to understand there's a contrasting reality to what's being painted here. But because I know Orania and what it stands for, and because I've spoken to those people that live there and visited it many times, I know that your interpretation or your story that you told about this is what I found there is the truth. That's the reality. And I know that what the BBC said they found there is a distortion of the truth, because they went there with an agenda.
Correct.
And my comment at the time was, it's amazing what you can achieve, what your crew presented or proved was, it's amazing what you can achieve when you approach a subject matter without an agenda.
Sure.
You're not approaching it to prove some point or approaching it to malign or antagonize a particular community and show how evil they are.
Yeah.
You're going there to have conversations, and maybe it comes out through those conversations that this community is, everything is true about them.
Correct.
That the media and people out there have
They
been
can
saying.
hang themselves if they want.
But you're going there with a microphone, putting it in front of them and saying, tell me more, show me, and I'll go show the world and I'll go show my audience. It's up to them what they show you and what they tell you and what is put on camera there.
Yeah.
And it just shows that there's so many people out there that will believe the twisted media presentation, but when they're not willing to, well, firstly, go see for themselves, but I don't expect everyone to go see for themselves, but then at least go watch the content of people that went there to see for themselves, but without an agenda.
Sure.
The people that went, and you can see they're not going there to create their own little narrative or story. You're just going there to show, I'm taking the people that don't have the option to go visit themselves, I'm taking them with me through my camera, and I'm going to go show them. They can come to their own conclusion.
Sure.
I'm not going to tell them what to think.
I've got 3 points. Trevor Noah, the second one is hypocrisy, and then the third one is my dilemma.
Making notes. I can see
Yeah,
bullet
making
points,
mental notes. Trevor Noah speaks about how prejudice doesn't hold up well against contact. What that means in simple English is you bring a bunch of radical black people into a space, you bring a bunch of radical white people into a space, and you maybe let them spend a week together, a camp of sorts, where we want you to explain to these racist white people why they're wrong. And then we want you to explain to these racist black people why they're wrong. Give them a week. And in that week, at some point, someone's going to get a phone call. Their daughters may be ill. Someone's going to get an update that, maybe their house is being repossessed. Someone is learning that maybe they've just got an attender. And you start learning things that you've never thought existed. I think he was speaking specifically about what we call Islamic terrorism. That a lot of the white radicals in America who speak about these terrorists, and it's like, have you ever visited Muslims? Have you ever got any friends? Just speak to them and just hear what they have to say. And it's happening especially now with Iran having counterattacked Israel. Because Israel apparently on the 1st of April, I think attacked one of their embassies or consulates. So they were, it's a mess. He says it doesn't hold up well. Whether it's gay people, black, white, Indian, colored, Jewish, Muslim, you spend some time with them, walk around where they live, listen to their ideas. It's difficult thereafter to just be like, I hate these people. It's difficult. And I think that's very important for people to, especially the people you claim to hate. If you really hate them and you think you're a problem, maybe go spend time with them so that you can figure out what's wrong with them and either help them or figure out how you can maybe get rid of them. Be like, oh, the reason these Zimbabweans are here is because Zimbabwe is bad. So maybe if we help fix Zimbabwe, they'll go back home. Or the reason they're here is because there's no border. Let's go build a border so then but you won't know that until you spend time with these people. How did you get here? Oh, no, I just walked. You just walked. Okay, that's where the problem is. So go spend time with these people. But once you start spending time with these people, you're like, oh, snap. But this sounds like my cousin from the Eastern Cape. This sounds like my cousin from the Free State. This sounds like my brother from KZN. Why are you here? Just looking for a better life. That's where I come from. There aren't that many opportunities. That sounds so familiar. I'm here for that. But I mean, you shouldn't be here. Yes, I know. But what do you do when you're looking for a better life for your family? I want to go home, but I fell in love with a girl here. Snap, I fell in love with a girl not from wherever I come from. So
I come from the Western Cape and I married a Transvaal meisie.
Stealing our girls. Bring back our girls, hashtag. So that's the first part, that people really need to engage whoever they think they hate, don't like, maybe don't even understand. This journalist did that. He went back with whatever narrative suited him or whatever agenda. That's him. Other people must go do the same and go validate. The guy was right. Or go and be like, oh, this Penuel guy was actually lying. He was the one selling propaganda. But go spend time with some of those people. Like you said, at the lowest level, go watch content of people that have been there. Go listen to some of the interviews. Sometimes it's something as simple as a Google search and reading one article. Really? So they don't? But they kill black people. Where? Show me. Show me where. No, but I've heard where on Twitter.
No, the kids
Just
on the
show
bus.
me, you know? But how did you get in the fence? There's no fence. So already, again, to what you were saying earlier, if I already can realize people have been lying about this, how much more? So Trevor Noah. I hate the hypocrisy of the British. Of course, this was a black guy, but he's British now. America, maybe we can link it to fossil fuels and renewables. You have got these people that have committed atrocities over history. Slave trade, the Middle Passage, taking black Africans to America to go and build the beauty of America today, make America great. You look at British colonialism and what it's done. I mean, can even reference for Afrikaans people the concentration camps they had here. And then those people years later have got the audacity to come and want to dictate and shout at people about the way that they're living and the way they're doing things. Don't use fossil fuels. Coal is bad for the environment. Like, how did you build your economy? Did you build it with wind energy? Did you build it with water flowing down? To come and tell us today that we can't use a resource that we're rich in, that our people don't have an issue with, and that when you look at the data, we are nowhere close to the carbon emissions that you guys continue to do in Europe, in Germany, in China, in America. You guys are building nuclear stations, power plants today, but you're telling us, no, nuclear is our show us that nuclear is a problem, but you guys are building. It's very triggering. And of course, so I'll add this nuance because I'm black and I can use it. You send a black face on behalf of a British agenda to go and do that. Let's send a white Afrikaans girl to Orania to come back. Oh, people in Orania are so racist. You're like, who is this girl? Then you find out, no, she's part of this political party and her family, and you're like, you see, this doesn't help. Because now people are going to be like, but even that white Afrikaans girl said you're like, it's an agenda. Why would a black person be racist? Well, because he's British. Why would this, because he's, which I get accused of, because I speak well of AfriForum and Orania, I get seen as this, and people will use it however they want. And I'm like, to what you're saying, go research for yourself. So the hypocrisy is very, very tiring. The third part is this, the dilemma I have. I do dream of a cosmopolitan, multicultural, humanist type of world. I dream of it. I think Martin Luther King Jr. did. Nelson Mandela tried to push for it as well. Mother Teresa maybe as well. I don't know if we actually must strive for it. Because there's the other side, right, of segregation. Some type of apartheid, Bantustans as well, where people just identify with their own people. They could be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Rasta. You could be Baha'i. You could be Afrikaner. You could be Zulu. You could be American, Iranian, Spanish, China. Like whatever you identify with as your core ideology, be like, okay, go find your people and go build your thing. Just don't harm anyone. There's a beauty in that. You build much faster. There isn't as much friction. Guys speak a similar language. Certain religious beliefs are aligned. What has happened over history is those groups need one radical to be like, we're better than those people and we want to go stay there. We want to go and do that. Then the fights come. The people that push agendas stand on the shoulders of history. And the reason many black people struggle to remove emotions from any Afrikaner progress is because of apartheid. They can't hear anything at all. I can imagine if I'm an Afrikaans family and I've been alive for 3-4 generations and my family has experienced a lot of crime, murders, maybe rapes, theft, and all of them all of them have been committed by black people. And you live in this sheltered bubble where the only black people you know are your gardeners, your maids. You went to a fully white Afrikaans school. You don't know black people in a capacity of brilliance and a smart mind and building and leadership. So you have this bias, you know, and when you're like, I just want to build for my people, the next black person is like, but look at the history of where your family comes from. It becomes difficult when you sit in those spaces and you listen to both sides. This guy is crying. You spoke about farm murders and the people you know. Then you listen to the other side, you're like, you know, my family members were tortured in the jail cells during Apartheid, and my grandfather was gunned down by a white police officer or a soldier. And then you have to come in as Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela and reconciliation, and you're like, you realize after we shake hands, this guy is going back to a mansion, I'm going back to a squatter camp. You realize when we shake hands, I'm going back to my uncle who can't get a job because he's not black, he's not female. This guy is going back to a mansion and tenders because he's black. Maybe his woman who's black, they tick all the right boxes. You're like, tell us what we must do once we leave here. And you're like, I don't have the answers because I'm also just a guy. I'm not the government. I'm not a billionaire. My dilemma is the world run better segregated? And then we just manage the segregation? Maybe what we call countries today, or provinces, or religions. Like, look, keep your thing, but try to not harm other people. Or does the world run better forcing integration, where you're with people you don't like, you don't agree with? They are gods. The things that they eat, the way that they spend money, the way that they let their girls dress, the things that they're allowing boys to do to other boys. You're like, should we force this thing until we get to one? I don't know. I struggle with it because it looks like where I am trying to create some type of unity and diversity. But when you meet certain people, especially people that have done great things, you realize that a lot of it is one ideology, one culture, one China. So I struggle. I struggle with that. And in that, when these things happen where propaganda is being peddled by a British journalist, I ask myself what he's going to achieve with whatever he's doing. Maybe it's better. Maybe he must sell such a horrible story that no one wants to engage with Orania and Afrikaans people, and they can carry on doing what they do. Because maybe if you bring someone in, all of a sudden Afrikaner heritage and culture and what you're trying to do gets eroded. Now all of a sudden it's like, but let's all vote. What language should we speak? English. You're like, no, but we built this as an Afrikaner dorp. You're like, no, we're now allowing more kids into help mekaar. We want, and you're like, but that's, it's a really tough one for me, and I don't have an answer for it. But I do understand all the sides, including the sides that lie. Because somewhere in their agendas, they reference history. Somewhere in their agendas, there's truth. But it's destructive. I think that's the thing that probably hurts me the most. After you wrote that and after you released that, do you think it built anyone, or do you think it destroyed people? And if the answer is it destroyed people, then I think what you did wasn't a good thing. But if after what you did, people were built, people were inspired, people were motivated, even if they maybe still don't get along, I'm like, I think you did a good thing. But the coming to that decision is really hard for me. I don't know what your thoughts would be on just that.
I think what you're touching on there is one of the critical questions, not just in South Africa, but globally. It's the question of how should communities and nations be organized when in a increasingly globalized and increasingly diverse world, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to different types of border policies, whatever. So I think what's most important is that there is I don't want to call it a middle ground, but there's a third way. So you've got these two extremes. The one extreme is forced separation, forced by the state. This is apartheid would be an example. On the other side, you have forced integration. Sometimes if you listen to some of the rhetoric from South African politicians, that's what they want, forced integration. Every workplace, every school, every town, every neighborhood, everything
Sure.
has to be perfectly demographically representative. And
Yeah.
if it's not, the state needs to come in and smash it. And
Quotas are a good example
yeah,
in sports.
yeah, and turn it into perfectly representative. And then when it's not, state comes in, changes that around, micromanages it to be perfectly. But that's forced integration.
Correct.
It's not a choice, I think, between one or two. I
Okay.
think there's a third way, and that's organic organization, where you let communities organically organize freely as they want. So it's not we have an idealistic, utopian view of I want this type of society or this type of society, and I want to use the power of the state to micromanage it. But you need to create the space where communities can organize as they want and to freely associate with who they want. And I mean, that's what Orania is a perfect example of. It's a freedom of association town where the Iranians want to freely associate with fellow Afrikaners. They're not taking anything away from anyone else. They're not forcing anyone else to do anything. Their entire community is contained within Orania.
Yeah.
Whereas either forced integration or forced separation is meddling in other people's affairs.
Correct.
That is using the power of the state to go into people's homes, to go into their sports teams, into their schools, into their churches, into their workplaces, to infiltrate the state's power there and to micromanage it to fit a certain agenda. So I think it's not one or the other. It's to go and support organic human organization. Let humans freely associate as they want and organize organically. And you see this in South Africa as well, and with different cultures and languages. It's not everywhere it's perfectly the same. You have mixed spaces as well. But often Zulus stick together, or Tswana stick together, or Afrikaners stick together. You see the broader patterns where people like being surrounded by people that speak their language
Sure.
or share their culture. It doesn't mean they exclusively stay in that space and don't want anything to do with anyone else outside of it.
Sure.
But it means that people like associates. A religion is another good example. You have neighborhoods that are majority Muslim or majority Jewish or majority Christian. That's an organic human organization. The state didn't come in and say, I'm talking about now the modern South African state, and say, here's a new neighborhood, this is going to be a Muslim neighborhood,
Sure.
and nobody else is allowed by law to live here.
Sure.
It is, if a Muslim neighborhood pops up somewhere in South Africa, that was organic organization.
Sure.
It wasn't the state imposing it on reality. But that's a much larger conversation there. It's the same principle. It's something completely different, but the same principle when we talked about a superiority and inferiority complex. Doesn't mean you have to have either of the two. You can
Sure.
just have the middle, which is a healthy self-confidence or a healthy self-image, a self-confidence where you acknowledge the negatives of yourself, but also are proud of the positive stuff. Whereas a inferiority complex is you just believe everything about you is negative,
Yeah.
while a superiority complex is you believe everything about you or your culture or your community is positive.
Sure.
Whereas just a healthy self-image is you take both of them. And it's the same principle with human organization, where no, I don't think it should be either or of forced integration or forced separation. Just give humans and people and communities the space to organize as they want.
Sure.
And they're not, when you don't like the results of how they organically and freely organize, say, well, now I need the state to come smash this and turn it into my own vision.
Am I allowed to counter?
Yeah, sure.
So I think that third way that you're speaking about is very idealistic. It's great. I think it's idealistic, and I sadly believe the world operates differently from idealism. I also think there's a small bit of naivety as well in it. So choosing to organically organize today, almost without acknowledging history and certain impositions in the past, I think is part of the danger that certain people want to try and remedy, to use in that sense. You and I are here speaking a foreign language. So people will say, but you guys freely chose it.
Yeah.
And my argument would be like, we actually didn't. You know, the British colonized big chunks of the world, and they came and they imposed themselves on South Africa. And myself as a Zulu speaker, and Ernst as a Afrikaans speaker, which came from other languages as well, we didn't choose English. It was almost engineered in a way that we almost had no choice, but you guys called it choice. Similar argument I could have about being Zulu as well. That Ushaka went and consolidated different families and kingdoms, not mostly by choice.
No, he created an empire.
Into this Zulu empire where now I'm proudly Zulu. And it's like, and when I organize with other Zulu people, it's like, but you realize you're organizing, it wasn't organic at some point. And you may find a time where even with organic organization, I did say there will be people that might want that superiority thing of we're being organic. I'm speaking isiZulu, you're speaking Afrikaans. Maybe we're like the United Nations and you've got an earpiece and it translates. And someone's like, but why? Why is he listening in Afrikaans? I think Zulu's the superior language. And then they start planting these seeds in other people. There's a fear that when you allow idealists to do their thing, it makes people passive and it allows people with sinister, underhanded, undertoned agendas to then do their thing. Because it's like, but guys, it's freedom. It's the Constitution. It's human rights. And you're like, but your human rights is forcing agendas into my child's school that I don't agree with. It's like, no, but this is organic. It's, it's something, it's democracy. It's what the country, I don't know about that. And it's like, if you say no to this, you're now not being organic. You're forcing a segregation of these type of kids that want to come into this classroom or their parents. One of the things Rutendo Matinyarara, a Zimbabwean, who normally comes on my platforms, cautioned against, and I cannot write off his concern because history will always beat me. Orania, I think, started off, I don't remember the exact amounts, but let's say with 800 hectares. And today it sits at 10,000 hectares. That's a serious growth. It's beautiful. We celebrate it. More of like-minded Afrikaners are coming in. They're close to 3,000 population. And he says, it's organic. It's beautiful today. It's free association, which maybe at some point people thought the same about in Israel. Started off organic, Jewish people, they're doing their thing. Today there's conflicts. Whichever side you're on, there's a conflict. There are people dying on both sides. And the concern could be if you allow certain groups of people to freely organize, let's say Zulus, because they are the majority in South Africa. Everywhere where they organize in South Africa, they might be the majority. And in some way, in the schools, when it's time to vote, everyone must speak Zulu in the school. When they decide to get into Afis or Waterkloof, they vote, now it's Zulu. They may come with sinister agendas, other underhanded, that the passive, let's all do things organically, may miss. And that's the only counter that I would have. And it's the reason why you do end up with intervention. One of the heroes in Orania is, I think, Hendrik French. Verwoerd. They've got a museum named after him. Very nice clip of him speaking about apartheid as good neighborliness. Whatever their intentions may have been, a lot of the successes of the Bantustans, which we speak about sadly today, have been eroded. Free organization. The only reason we're putting a border between South Africa and Zimbabwe, South Africa and Botswana, it's not because we hate them. It's us just saying, these are our people. But over time, now someone is killing someone from Mozambique because they're here. Now someone is oppressing someone from Namibia. And you're like, there's always that danger. That's why I still say there's this dilemma for me. So I can agree that a forced either or is not ideal. I cannot 100% support the third way because human beings are human beings. And in history, you've got Jesus Christ. Probably, I apologize to Christians, whether it's a fictional character for non-believers, or if he really, really lived in history. You've got Jesus Christ, where, whether fiction or not, everything about his existence was peace and love. No destruction, no those people. It was peace, love. We're all God's children. And there were people, even in that went and used Christianity with the Crusades to kill millions. There have been a form of crusades under Islam as well, where they had slavery, where they also killed many people. Today, when I listen to Jewish people defend Israel, when I look at the hate the hate in the comments and the replies from so-called Muslim people. You're like, this cannot be healthy. The Muslim person is not saying, look, I stand with Palestine, I think what's happening is wrong, but I wish peace on everyone. They will use words which are almost alluding to, we wish Israelis or Jewish people were to be wiped out. And you're like, this is not healthy. And if you're going to claim that you're peaceful, you're not. There's polarized groups in every, and when you come in, like I said, as this third way humanist, you catch bullets from both sides. They're like, no, you were sent by these people. No, you were sent by those people. You're like, guys, there's a third way. There's no third way. Because when we let these black people come and what, they want to force this. When we let people organize their rugby teams, the white Afrikaans coach refuses to pick that talented black boy because his friend from church, his son also plays in the team, and there's no way he's not going to pick him. So then you're forced with this intervention because human beings in their nature and their biases, they refuse the organic. And it takes long if you're not a patient person and you don't have 500 years of Chinese visions. You're like, no, my son wants to play first team. I will make sure that he plays first team. It means I'm bribing the coach, sponsoring the team. So I'm not disputing the third way. It's a beautiful way. I'm countering merely on the concerns of what might happen when we have a non-racial, united South Africa with a beautiful flag and a constitution where we still see so much hate today. Because we've got freedom of association and whatever today. But whether that's really existing and if we've seen a better South Africa with that versus a more organized, we may not like it, situation, I don't know.
You see, that's where the balance, or the tug of war comes in between the idealistic visions and the reality on the ground. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned the opposition to some type of idea, because if you have a conversation about solutions, the way forward, how should we be approaching problems? If I mention a solution and you think, I think there's an opposition, there might be opposition to it, but you just let me say my solution, say, no, that's the way.
Yeah.
And you didn't mention that there is an opposing argument to it as well. That conversation is not as ironclad or bulletproof as it could be. Now, I'm not going to sit here and we back and forth constantly now just about this one point. The audience already has both sides, or the opposing point as well. And I think another conversation where this principle of you have an idealistic vision, but then reality comes in is very, very evident, is this whole idea that you get from any anarchists or libertarians where they say we just need a world without any states, any laws, nothing, just everyone on their own. And the opposing argument, which is very solid, is but humans will always organize.
Correct.
You might have your self-sufficient little community, but the 2 or 3 communities on the other side of the hill might organize and then come take your stuff. And how do you defend against that? Well, you're going to have to organize with other communities around you. Now you have 2 warring factions. Then another faction comes in that's organized. They create an alliance and then eventually an empire with one of your enemies. Now you've just increasingly centralized the opposing sides. Now, without opening that entire conversation on that topic as well, it's just an example of where, again, there's a very interesting conversation around an ideal or something to strive towards. But it's also important to mention that there are also opposing views to it. So I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that as well.
Because we go with your third way ideal, 5-10 years later there's hiccups, and I'm like, I actually thought about this then. It's like, why didn't you say it? Because we could have planned for it. Maybe my question to you is only for South Africa, maybe not for the whole of the world yet as a pilot. Do you think we should experiment with mixed organization models? And maybe allow people to choose? So for example, I'm going to use extremes for illustration purposes. You take one province and you say, we are going to apply apartheid here. And any South Africans who would like to have apartheid without maybe the oppression, but forced camps, can go live there. Any South Africans, we've got a province for forced integration. You can go live there. And then for the rest, we'll allow you to organically. Would you entertain maybe something as an experiment over, let's say, like a 20-year period, to constantly track and report to people that the apartheid province, their economy is doing really well, but maybe they have high inequality. The forced integration, they always debating, always speaking about rainbow this and progressive this and woke that, and this is how the economy is doing, this is how the children are looking in terms of health, etc., etc. And then this organic, maybe province, maybe we can have just 3 provinces and then the rest of South Africa can carry on as is. This organic province, this is how they're doing, and constantly updates. I don't know. Would you consider something like that?
That's a fascinating question. The one concern I would have with that hypothetical would be that an experiment implies a laboratory or a scientist that's orchestrating the experiment. He's in control.
Sure.
Who would be orchestrating that experiment? And the implication would be necessarily that it's some big central state. And that's the story of the 20th century. The story of the 20th century is a century of grand projects and experiments.
Sure.
Even, it's funnily enough, even the new South Africa in 1994 was referred to at that stage, not anymore, as the new South African experiment.
Sure.
But that was characteristic of the time, of these massive projects and experiments. And I think rather we should be looking for case studies of or examples of societies or nations or communities of ideas that we want to test, but it shouldn't be conducted like an experiment where we put all the ingredients there and then we observe.
Sure.
Because then you need a state to do that.
Yeah.
Rather, identify those things happening all across the world, in your own country, wherever, and then keep an eye on them. Then you're not coercing anyone into a test tube or into a laboratory. So an example of that would be, if you want to see what libertarian policies produce, you can look at Argentina now under Milei, that was just recently voted in there.
Sure.
We don't know yet what the results will be. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know he's going to be pushing a lot of libertarian ideology and policies. So if you want to see what those policies do, watch that case study. Orania, if you want to see what happens if you take Afrikaners and you have an Afrikaner community and they are motivated to preserve their culture and their language and a future, watch Orania. You don't have to have this scenario where a state is putting, like a scientist, all these things in a test tube or in a experiment holding place and then watching it. That would be my main concern with this idea of this province does this, this province does this, this province does this.
Do you think we already have the examples of what I'm speaking about? A place with forced segregation, a place with forced integration, and maybe organic.
I think we've, throughout history...
No, specifically in South Africa. Do you think we have those spaces?
I think in our history we have an example of that being attempted. Now, on the one side, you have something that you're striving towards or something you're attempting. Doesn't mean you're going to achieve it. So, for example, the apartheid system is an example of attempted forced segregation.
Sure.
New South Africa is an attempt at forced integration. Sure. Now, many people will say, no, but it hasn't achieved that, or it's not that. Well, that's what's being attempted if you look at the ideology and what many politicians are saying. So you're never going to have that. Again, an experiment is a controlled environment, and humans are too complex.
I hear you.
That, according, in my humble opinion, is the major flaw of the 20th century, is that we thought you can just experiment with human society. You can have nations that are experiments and projects. I actually had a recent conversation with Professor Dani Goosen of academia, who said apartheid is one of the best examples of a modernist project, of like a project where you micromanage, try to create like a little test tube with humans in it and see what happens. Not literally, but that's an example of the thinking that characterized the century. It wasn't unique to South Africa. You see it, many different versions of it all across the world.
I'm going to take this as homework for myself to try and identify the existing case studies. I think that would be great. I've been attacked before for half cheering the apartheid government for some of their achievements. One of the problems with, maybe you'd call it an experiment project, is if we feel like it's failed, we almost refuse to acknowledge any good that came from it. And I think that's one of the flaws. Whether it's apartheid or this new project that we have now, this Rainbow Nation, to be like, but what are the good things here that if we ever start a third project, as an example, that we're like, let's preserve some of these things. I think that would be cool. Okay. Why can't we discuss light things, man? Like how Palchem beat Offies over the weekend. Jeez.
You just wanted to insert that at the end.
I have to insert that. It was a great game. Offies really dominated. I was actually supporting Palchem because I think they're the best team in the country. But your Offies dominated up until the end. And then I think their kicker missed 2 very vital kicks, and it was a 1-point game. I just needed to insert that. And then the other thing I needed to insert is Jeppy Boys. Shout out to Jeppy Boys. They beat Grey College from Bloemfontein earlier this year at Noordside. And I think Grey College is angry. I think they're very angry. They had, I think, their first game after that defeat against a very brilliant rugby school called Otanikwa. And they beat them 90 points to 3. Sorry.
No, I think all my rugby fans in the audience are now the real conversation is
Yeah,
starting.
this is the real
now.
conversation.
They're going to be very angry at me when I tell them.
When is this coming out? There's another conversation about
Yeah.
the blow pillar, but I won't raise it.
No, this one's going to be coming out depending on how long it takes to edit.
No problem.
Probably somewhere in April, early May. We'll
No
see.
problem. Sorry, that was
No.
enough with me and the rugby.
Now, I'm sad to disappoint the audience that are big fans of rugby now, and we're not going to be having another hour conversation on
About rugby.
deep analysis, but maybe you should start a rugby or a sports channel analysis page.
I'll think about it. Maybe I'll visit certain sports. I'm a huge fan of schoolboy rugby. Schoolboy rugby in particular, but also
But you have
pro
a
rugby.
personal connection. You've mentioned it so many times.
Yeah.
so-
It would be nice to chat about. I see now sports schools, whatever. They've started flighting a lot of the first team games, which is really brilliant, so people can watch it online. And they've now gone all the way to under 16 games. That's how serious our rugby is. For like the international audience that doesn't know, the reason the Springboks are great is because the rugby culture at schools is incredible. So, and shout out to Kez. Kez gave Parktown boys an 80-0 hiding. They finished the game 15 minutes before it was supposed to play because it was just bad. Sorry. Okay, I'm done.
I think that's it's actually quite refreshing when we don't end on a heavy note. We
Sure.
don't end on a sigh like, that's just how it is.
Are we closing? I've got a question for you. Or,
Sure, as long as it's not too heavy.
No,
Then you can
it's
shoot.
probably going to be the heaviest thing that I raised today.
Let's do
it's
it.
a suggestion and an invite.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're 30 years in, apparently, of this supposed democracy. And I don't know if 30 years is a good time frame, but a lot of us are frustrated. And I think frustration is a good enough measure for potential change or adjustment. I would like for us, between the ages of 16 to 40, but we can always, have outliers, to have a CODESA 2.0. I'd like us to sit and speak about where we come from, apartheid, touch on British colonial rule, touch on these 30 years. Some people argue that it's short, but like I said, we're frustrated now. So I think that's good enough to have a sit down and imagine what was discussed by Nelson Mandela, F.W. de Klerk. I think Cyril Ramaphosa was the chief negotiator for the ANC, and Meneer Rolf Meyer was the chief negotiator for the National Party. He went on to join the UDM later, and I think he's joined the ANC now. They had CODESA 2.0. I think the country we're living in now are the results of that, because they never really published this is what we are doing. But we had RDP, that plan, that development plan. We had the houses, of course, we call them RDPs now. We had Black Economic Empowerment, of which Cyril has become a billionaire because of it, and his brother-in-law, Patrice Motsepe. We've had broad-based economic empowerment. We've had the quota system in sports and in rugby in particular. We've had whatever education system we've got now. Sadly, part of it is the lack of investment in infrastructure, with us seeing ESCOM become what it's become, Transnet becoming what it's become. I think we're due for another sit down. I would like for people over the age of 40, maybe 45, 50, people that won't be alive. Jeez, I'm sorry. People that may not be alive in the next 30 to 50 years to maybe sit this one out, because they arguably had their chance then. For us to actually sit and imagine South Africa for the next 50 years and have a CODESA 2.0 from relatively young leaders, political. I know the Kings and the Chiefs were represented at CODESA, but I don't think they were represented well enough. Get tribal leaders, get religious leaders, get business leaders. Between the ages of 16, and I'm using 16 on purpose, there are brilliant young people out there. Get them to sit, discuss these things of forced integration, forced segregation, organic. Do we like our flag? Do we like the national anthem? People sit there and they still, does it actually get the boys going? Do they want to dance? Do we want a new flag? Maybe this flag is great, but we, would like to reimagine the flag. Do we like a uniform? Do we like to change our education system with technology? What do businesses look like in South Africa? What is our economic vision for the country? Our religious vision. Are we comfortable with 80% of the country being Christian? What do we think of LGBTQI+, who were sadly, I'll add this on, I'll take the hits. It was imposed on us. It wasn't something that I think was organic in South Africa. There was an agenda globally. And now the LGBTQI+ narrative is being brought here, along with wokeness, Black Lives Matter, which started in America. What do we want? What is our opinion on that? And how do we move forward as a nation? Either completely, are we happy with the Constitution? Do we want to tweak parts of it? So I was going to ask what you think of an idea like CODESA 2.0, but it's something that I really want to champion, even if it's an online podcast, doesn't matter. But I'd like to invite you as well, especially as a young leader, to be like, I would like for us to sit down, do a historical audit, and then be like, it's our time now. We get to do our own vision for South Africa, maybe SADC, maybe the borders, currency, moving forward. And then from there, be like, the next generation is going to be like, Penuel and Adam sat and they gave us this rubbish, and this is why we're in the dark, and this is why economies become rubbish, and this is why we have cryptocurrencies instead of the rand. And then in 30 years' time, if they want to intervene, or in 50 years' time when it's time for a review, they sit in their review and they're like, let's take stock. But these guys didn't just sit down and be like, but Apartheid, ANC. They were like, no, we think we have ideas, we think we know the history, and we'd actually like to sit down and reimagine. And we'd like to create a new plan or tweak what already exists, and then pitch it to South Africa and see how we can filter this down to our institutions.
Well, I think that's a very noble and ambitious thing to strive towards.
Idealistic and naive.
No, but you should be striving towards something. That's the whole idea of idealism. I mean, it can be dangerous, but also you should be striving towards an ideal. I mean, the perfect Penuel, the perfect Adams, you're never going to be that, but you're striving towards it every day.
Correct.
Striving to be better. It doesn't make you a fool or make you naive. You're trying to be better or trying to create something, even if it's not perfect. And I think that's a noble ideal to strive towards. Even if you don't succeed in creating exactly what you have in mind, at least striving towards something noble or beautiful or productive or good. It must have good results along the way. So absolutely, I'll definitely be part of that. And accept the invitation.
Thank you.
But Benoit, that brings us to the end. I mean, we can still chat for very long, but
we can definitely gooi.
Yeah, I know there's definitely other things that the studio is being used for. So I booked it for a specific time, and my show is usually between, people can go check, between an hour and 15 minutes.
Thank you.
I know that's for me, that's a nice one. You can corner the market on Joe Rogan length interviews, 2 hours, 3 hours. I won't steal that from you. You can be the master with that. But I think what you're describing there again brings us full circle back to how we started this conversation. That's again that there needs to be discussions about different ideas, and not just within an echo chamber where you just speak to people that you agree with. Because that's how a lot of the problems that we see in the world around us started, is that people they siloed themselves off and they didn't get exposure to different ideas that actually challenged them.
Can I pose a challenge to you and your audience?
Yeah, sure.
So to you first, or no, to your audience first. The challenge is, when CODESA 2.0 comes up, I would like them to give us ideas of what they'd like us to discuss, what's important to them, whatever their personal individual desires are, what they'd like to see us talking about or change, etc. And then challenge to you, it's just a challenge, you don't have to use it. It would be nice to maybe take certain comments that you get from whatever sit down, and when you have sit downs with whoever the guest may be, to maybe just say, been reading some of your comments and I just want to respond to this, that. You don't have to mention the person. Whether it's criticism, whether it's suggestions, could be subtitles, could be language, could be guests, to be like, we know you guys have been asking for Steve Hofmeyer, we'll try and get him on, kind of situation. I think that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the comments that stood out to me, I'd like to end with, under our previous chat, was someone who said that these are the conversations we need to be having that nobody's having.
Yeah.
These are the important conversations that nobody's having. And I'd like to try in my capacity to have some of those important conversations that nobody's having, and you're definitely achieving it with your platform. So that's why I invited you on, is to have another hopefully important conversation that not enough people are having. And we should strive towards that, even if we don't have all the necessary conversations, even if we maybe even not get to the solutions that are necessary. Maybe we miss them, maybe we make major mistakes, maybe we fall into the same pitfalls of people in the past, our ancestors. We need to try. We have tried.
We have tried. I want to say thank you to Mornay and Conrad and the whole team at the atelier here at AfriForum. Really appreciate you being here.
Right. Thank you for your time, Penuel, and we'll chat again real soon. Moilo.
Thanks, Ars.